Namaskar. Hello and welcome to P Guru's channel. I'm your host Shriyaya. Joining me today after a brief hiatus is Kalavai Venkat as we take a look at some new revelations about Virgin Mary. And this is by way of a few books that have come in the last few months. Kalavai ji has done extensive research on this, and it would be beneficial to all of us to understand the origins of Christianity, the truths behind who said what, and so on and so forth. So I'm now going to introduce you to Kalavai Venkat ji, and we have a small slide deck also to share with you. First, let's introduce Kalavai ji. Namaskaram, sir. How are you?
Namaskar, here. Good morning. Let me start with a very brief introduction, then we can bring up the slide.
Yes.
Usually, my viewers are not used to me presenting with slides, but this time we want to introduce a few books names. We'll do it in a minute, not yet. But the very first question is, right? So when we start with a subject like this, a lot of people are wondering, why are we running this Christmas special? Because we are going to run a series of 8 such podcasts, such interviews between now and the 25th of December. And most people are wondering, why are we doing this? And let me make it very clear, this is a conversion attempt. Okay, we are trying to convert Christians out of Christianity, do a garvapsi, bring them back to Hindu Dharma. And the way we do that is going to be exactly the opposite of how the Christian missionaries went about. Christian missionaries, for the last 150 years or 200 years, have been abusing Hindu Dharma everywhere. They'll spread lies, they will indulge in hate speech, demagoguery of every kind possible, and that's how they attack Hinduism. We are not going to do that. We are going to speak the truth, the most scholarly versions of the truth, and we'll cite the original sources and we'll present the truth, and that will make every Christian question his own faith. That will make every Hindu to understand what the truth is and to engage the Christians and to bring them back to Hindu Dharma. That's the objective. I'm not going to be ashamed of that. I'm not going to be defensive about that. And that's the objective with which we are starting today's session. So
Thank you
the
so much,
first
sir. One
question,
second. Just
yeah,
just give me 1 second. We are loading up the first slide, but a request to all of you to please like this video. We need to have this thing go as much viral as possible. We have spread the word out on the net since yesterday, but we'd just like to see as many people as possible joining us. And I'm going to yield the floor to Venkatji again. Over to you, sir.
thank you. Thank you, Shreya. So the first question, most people, before we go into the slide, the first question many of you are having in mind is, what is the new thing? What are the untold stories of the Virgin Mary that we are going to reveal, which is not there in the Bible, which is not there in the New Testament? So the first thing is, the New Testament itself is not a reliable book. So most Christians think it's a first person testimony by the 4 apostles about the life of Jesus. They think they recorded everything in live and then they wrote it down as a book. That's not at all true. So here you are seeing a wonderful book, a very scholarly book called Misquoting Jesus. It's by Professor Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman is one of the, probably the leading authority when it comes to New Testament studies, the early evolution of Christianity, everything. And he's a professor at the UNC, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and an absolutely great author and speaker. And he points out that the New Testament is the product of holy forgery mill. And the Christian church manufactured new books and then edited the existing ones, and they kept on doing that for centuries. It started somewhere in the 2nd, 3rd century, but it continued all the way up to the Middle Ages, which is maybe 1400, 1500. Bart Ehrman makes one more very interesting observation, which you can read on this page, that if you take the English version of the King James KJV or the King James version of the Bible, there are something like 190,000 words in that version, in the English version. Whereas there are more manuscripts variants than there are words in the English version of KJV. That is, in other words, the Holy Forgery Mill was running rampant for centuries, and that's how the New Testament, the Christian Bible, was produced. So that should not give Christians too much confidence that, look, this is the only book I'm going to look at. And based on this book, I'm going to believe everything, because that book is not trustworthy. It's an anthology that was written by a holy forgery mill over several centuries. And that's why every Christian, and for that reason, even a non-Christian, should keep an open mind. Look at every source and then draw your own conclusions. Before we go into anything else, before you go into the next slide, I'm going to ask one question. How many children did the Virgin Mary have? Or how many brothers and sisters did Jesus have? Let me repeat again. How many children did the Virgin Mary have? And how many brothers and sisters did Jesus have? Don't have to respond to this, but most Christians would think, oh, the Virgin Mary had only one child, that's Jesus. And even he was born to a virgin, meaning he was born miraculously. So the Virgin Mary remained a virgin all throughout her life. That's the teaching that's come down from the Catholic Church, and it's believed by most people. However, the interesting thing is the earliest of the Gospels, the Gospel of Mark, is not aware of the virgin birth of Jesus or the virginal conception of Jesus. Similarly, the earliest epistles written by Paul, they were written, according to the mainstream dating, they were written a few years or a couple of decades after the death of Jesus. Paul is not aware of any virgin birth, and instead he talks about born of a woman, meaning Jesus was born of a woman just like every other person. So even when you look at the Christian texts, as I mentioned, first thing is it's not a reliable collection. The Christian Bible is not a reliable collection, as Bart Ehrman has shown here. But even more importantly, even within the Christian Bible, you have two different sources. You have, on the one hand, you have the Gospel of Mark and Paul and the epistles of Paul that have no idea that there was something called the virgin conception or the virgin giving birth to Jesus. Instead, these concepts arise only much later. Why? We'll see in the course of today's talk. Let's go to the next slide. There are three books we are going to touch upon today, and I'm going to make it as interesting as possible. The leftmost book, The Lost Mary, is a book by Professor James Tabor, another top class scholar and authority, once again at the UNC. I think he recently retired, and he just released this book in 2025. But every Hindu and even a Christian should get his hands on this book. At a high level, what's the thesis of this book? This book talks about how the cult of Mary evolved, but even more importantly, it talks about the role of the Virgin Mary in early Christianity. When we talk of early Christianity, we are talking of Christianity as it existed roughly 2000 years ago in what we call Palestine or Israel today. And this, and most, it was not a separate religion at the time. It was not called Christianity. It was, today scholars call it Jewish Christianity because it was a Jewish sect, and the Jews from around 100 BCE have been anticipating the arrival of a Messiah, and they did not know the identity of the Messiah. Everybody made a claim, I am the new Messiah, but the Jews did not accept. And one such person who made a similar claim was the Jesus of the New Testament. He claimed, I am the new Messiah. And then the early followers of this Messiah happened to be Jews. That's why it's called Jewish Christianity. And what James Tabor points out is in early Christianity, the Virgin Mary had a very important role. And she was not a virgin, and then she was a normal person, and she was a mother of many children. We'll see that in a couple of minutes. But she was also considered very important, maybe some kind of a teacher, some kind of a glue holding everyone together. That's why even the Bible talks about the son of Mary, which is a very strange appellation because usually you are referred to as the son of so and so, a male, a son of Joseph. But you never find that in the Bible. Instead, what you find is son of Mary is an appellation used. And what James Tabor proposes is, and he has argued it very well with a lot of evidence, that in the next 3 or 4 centuries, as Christianity evolved, it became more misogynistic. And then the role of a female teacher was an anathema to this emerging Christianity. And hence, she was sidelined, Mary was sidelined and turned into a virgin. Then the second book you are looking at is Mary by uh, Shoemaker, Professor Shoemaker, another absolutely great authority. He talks about the evolution of the Marian cult or the cult of Mary from around 150 CE to around 450 CE, over 300 years, how the cult evolved, how it borrowed from other traditions, and then how it became more of an organic cult over a period of time, over 3 centuries, rather than as a miraculous event that the Bible projects. The third book is the topic of our discussion today, the Jesus dynasty. This book is about, I think, 15 or 16 years old, again written by Professor James Tabor. And then he goes through the Christian sources, including the Bible, as well as the early Christian histories, especially that of Eusebius. And then he summarized all of those things that demolish a very fundamental belief of Christians that Mary was a virgin and she had only one child, Jesus, even he was born miraculously. Instead, it tells a story of a woman who had many children by citing the very Christian sources that most Christians ignore because Christians don't read the Bible critically. Especially if the Bible is the only book they have read in their entire life, their critical thinking has not evolved. So they listen to whatever sermon is given to them by their pastors and church fathers, and then they blindly think that Jesus was the only son. But when we look at the next slide, we'll see a very different story. So look at this slide. Right on top, you find Anna. Anna is the grandmother of Jesus. And Anna has two daughters. Very curiously, both of them are named Mary. What's the likelihood that anyone will have two children but give them exactly the same names? And that's the first curious fact that we observe here. And one of the two Marys is married to Joseph. Okay, that's the father of Jesus, not the physical biological father, but the caretaker. Or as I sometimes jokingly say, uh, Joseph was tricked by the Holy Ghost into paying alimony for a kid he never fathered. And then on the right hand side, you find the other Mary, Mary the second, and then she is married to a person by the name Clovis. So come to the bottom, you have six boxes which are listing all the children of this Mary or the two Marys. There is only one difference. Take Jesus out of the picture. So the left grayed out box is Jesus. Take him out. All the others are identical. All the children's names are identical. They are born in the same order. There are four boys and two girls. So in other words, apart from once you take Jesus out, the two Marys, very interestingly, not only have the same name, they have exactly the same number of children in the same order, and then also the same names. Now, this should be pretty sobering for most Christians. Now look at this. At the minimum, the Virgin Mary had seven children. Look at the left box. Jesus, four sons, and two daughters. Totally seven children. Did she remain virgin after every conception? And then was she a seven times virginal mother? Okay, that's a very ridiculous proposition. And of course, we don't have to disprove virgin conception at all because there was no test tube babies in those days. And then there was no surrogacy or anything in those days. And hence, the only way someone became pregnant was by having sex. So by that itself, we can discount. But even here, this is more startling. Two sisters are not going to have identical number of children, same order with the same names. So what does James Tabor propose? He proposes there were no two Marys. There was only one Mary. She was the
And this
daughter
is
of
James
Anna.
Tabor, right? In his new
This
book, The
is James
Last
Tabor.
Mary.
Yes, this is James
Yeah.
Tabor. The name of the book is Jesus Dynasty. We saw it in the previous slide. And later on, when you all play back the video, you can go back and note down the titles and you must read it. These are very exciting books. You should read those. But now James Tabor proposes there was only one Mary. Anna had one daughter, Mary, and then she was first married to Joseph, probably, and then Joseph died, and then she married Clovis. Clovis was probably Joseph's brother or somebody else from the same tribe, and she was married at least twice. So she gave birth to all the other children to Clovis, and that's why the entire uh, New Testament had to suppress the story and then spin the myth of the eternal virginity of Mary. So uh, he points out that uh, in this case, Joseph died very early, and I think that's most likely the scenario because if you look at the entire New Testament, Joseph makes a very brief appearance. Even though you now have a Saint Joseph, he's the father of Jesus, not the biological father, at least the caretaker who paid alimony, and then he was the father of Jesus, but then he finds very little mention. There are two very brief mentions right in the beginning when Jesus is born. That's a miraculous story. Nobody takes it seriously. Then for census, around that census, they run off to Egypt. That's it. And then Joseph goes off the radar. He disappears. Why? Because if the Virgin Mary And that ties with James Tabor's proposition that if he had died very early and then she had remarried, then that's the way church would have wanted to tell the story. Make Joseph disappear and don't talk about Clovis anymore. But the sources I mentioned at the bottom, you can go back to those verses. You can look at the ecclesiastical history by Eusebius. He's the church father. The authentic history of the early church was written down by him, authorized by the church, and all of them summarize these information. So his story, so James Tabor's proposition is the Virgin Mary was married twice. She was a twice married virgin. Was she still a virgin? That's the conclusion you should draw. But she was married twice. And this is a very common practice in ancient Judaism. It's called levirate. In Hinduism too, we had something similar. It's called miyoga. When the elder brother died, his younger brother married the widow so that they can take care of the family and everything. It was a very common practice. This was nothing abnormal in Judaism. And we can even say it was a very noble practice because that way the children did not suffer, they did not get abused or anything. They were part of the family. But when this concept was taken, as I mentioned, early Christianity was a Jewish cult. It was a Jewish sect. But when Christianity moved from Israel to the Roman Empire, to Greece and to Rome and other places, they were now faced with the pagan populations. Those people are not Christian. Those people are not Jewish. Those people are pagan. They followed various pagan religions. And for them, the concept of levirate was a strange concept. That somebody could marry the brother of her dead husband was a strange idea to the pagans of Rome. So, since Christianity was selling a new religion, Paul and others were selling a new religion, and not even Paul, subsequent to Paul, from 3rd century onwards, and others were selling this new religion to the Romans, they had to change the story so that the concept of levirate, which is so strange to the Romans, was suppressed. There was another reason too. If you look at all of the Roman Empire, when you look at gods like Zeus and many other gods, they are all born of virgins to earthly mothers, but gods. And hence, those are considered virginal conceptions. And even if you look at the story of Alexander, the Macedonian king, who invaded India, you will find a very similar story recounted by his chroniclers that he was born to gods, but to an earthly woman. So, what was happening was the early church proselytizers who were taking Christianity to the Roman Empire were rewriting the story, and then they were making Mary the eternal virgin. That's why if you go to Rome on tourism even today, you will find the temple of Vestal Virgins. So these are virgins who are dedicated to the service of the temple in the Roman state when it was a pagan empire, before Christianity came on the scene. So the concept of virgins dedicated to God, and then those virgins eventually giving birth to God's children was a well-known concept in the Roman Empire. And all the Christians did was to copy that and rewrite the story of the Virgin Mary using that. But otherwise, as you can see here, and based on the summary of James Tabor, the Virgin Mary was married at least twice. Why at least twice? We'll see that in the next slide. But for now, she was married at least twice and she had at least 7 children. There could have been more because there are some other verses of the New Testament that imply, if not state explicitly, that Mary had more than 2 daughters because they used the phrase all, and the Greek implies that it could have been more than two, but it could have been at least 7, it could have been more. And if somebody still wants to argue that that Mary was still a virgin after giving birth to 7 children, then at least they should call her a sevenfold virgin. Let's go to the next slide.
1 second. Yeah.
All right. Here I'm going to talk to you about 2 books. In the beginning, I pointed out that Christianity ran a holy forgery mill. I was citing the authority of Professor Bart Ehrman. And then for centuries, they edited the text, they invented new verses, they fabricated new verses, and it was a complete holy forgery mill. And hence, the New Testament itself is not a reliable source if you want to understand the truth of what happened in the earliest years of Christianity. You should look at other sources too, because contemporary sources came up. They also tell a story of the Virgin Mary. Either all of those are apocryphal and hence mythical and hence fictional. If so, there is no problem in learning about all of those things, or all of them contain some grain of truth. If so, you are going to find out the entire truth only by looking at all of those things. The book on the left is called The life story of Jesus or Toledo Yeshu. It is a Jewish text. It's a very polemical text. It was written down by the Jews, challenging some of the Christian claims, but then it tells a very interesting story of the Virgin Mary. Here, Mary is a Jewish girl, young woman. She is betrothed. She is betrothed to a rabbi by the name Yohanan. So the two are betrothed, and one day Yohanan visits her home, and when he comes in, he is shocked. Why is he shocked? Because he finds Mary in bed with another man. We do not know the name of this man, but it is suspected that he was a Roman soldier, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But uh, he finds her in bed in a compromising position with a stranger. So Yohanan is angry, terribly upset. He walks away. He calls off the betrothal. The engagement is over. And then Mary is portrayed in very negative terms in this book, Toledo Yeshu, because she went and had an affair with a Roman soldier, and then her engagement was called off. So in this story, it's very interesting. This is something James Tabor also talks about. And around that time, Toledo Yeshun kind of implies the name of the soldier was Pantera. Okay, but he was not a Roman. He was a Jewish man who was serving in the Roman legion and hence was posted in what is today's Israel, and probably went ahead and have an affair with the Virgin Mary. Well, not really a virgin, but with Mary. And then when Yohanan walked in, he was upset and he called off the engagement. James Tabor points out that there today survives the tombstone of one soldier by the name Pantera, okay, from exactly the same period, who's buried there, and it just carries his name Pantera and his first name, which I have forgotten, and then it mentions that. So, if at all we are looking for evidence, this is not direct evidence, this is indirect, but at least what we have is some kind of confirmation that Toledo Tieshu talks about a Pantera having illicit affair with Mary, and hence Yohanan the rabbi calling off the engagement. And the name of that fellow is Pantera, and we have the tombstone where this Pantera is buried. That's the story of Toledo Yeshu. And if we are being balanced, we should look at all the sources whenever we study a subject. And we looked at the Christian source, the New Testament, and we showed its story is not reliable. And in fact, a critical reading of the very Christian sources reveals that the Virgin Mary, mother of Jesus, had at least 7 children. Switch to the right. We cannot talk about Christianity and Judaism and leave out the third Abrahamic religion, uh, which is even more attention-seeking than Christianity, which is Islam. So 23 years on the right-hand side is the title of the book by the great scholar Ali Dashti. Ali Dashti was an Iranian scholar who was eventually put to death in the prison, or he died in the prison. He was effectively killed there. And he wrote this book 23 years. 23 years refers to the prophetic career of Muhammad. Muhammad spent 23 years from 610 AD to 632 AD, 23 years of prophetism. And Ali Dashti brings up our attention, draws our attention to a very important tafsir. Tafsir is a commentary on the Quran. So in the Quran, there's a very interesting revelation. And there are also hadiths that elaborate on that story. In this story, Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, has aged. He is in his 60s. He's on the verge of dying. And not only dying, it's suspected that he has been poisoned. And that's a very interesting story. A few years before, he raids one of the Jewish settlements, kills all the men, and then, very strangely, he orders the widows to cook meat, mutton, and everything for him. And look at this. This is a very irrational behavior, because you go and kill the menfolk of a community and order that women to go and make food for you. Prepare dinner for me. I just killed your husband. Okay. And that was Muhammad. And then obviously someone was going to take revenge. And one of the Jewish women, she poisons the collarbone, the meat around the collarbone of the lamb she cooked, and serves it to Muhammad. Muhammad accidentally bites into that. He's poisoned, and then he's debilitated for the next 1.5, 2 years, and eventually dies of that poison. Okay, that's what the Islamic sources tell us. And then towards the last years, Muhammad had a miserable life, because he had something like 11 or 12 wives. He had about if you add all the concubines, it was over 20. And Muhammad was aging. He was 63 or 64 by this time. And his wives were much younger. For example, Aisha was probably just around 17 or 18 at the time. She was young and raring to go. There are others like Joveria, again a young woman, very beautiful young woman. And then there was Zainab. She was probably in her late 20s at that time. And again, a very attractive woman for whom Muhammad had fallen. And all of these young women were themselves putting enough pressure on Muhammad. And Muhammad had a tough time. They will fight among one another and make life miserable for Muhammad. Then comes Allah one day. This is the beauty of Allah, Shri. Allah was the original Donald Trump. Okay. So today, Donald Trump goes around the world, says, look, I mediated, sorted out the India Pakistan war. I mediated, I sorted out the Israel Gaza war, Ukraine Russia war. Okay. Everything, right? So, yeah. And if you and I have an argument today on this call, rest assured in 15 minutes on Truth Social, Trump will claim that he sorted out the difference between the two of us. Okay. But Trump is not the original. Trump is a duplicate. The original is Allah. Okay. The God of Islam. Because Allah intervenes. Okay, the wives are fighting, and Allah comes and says, here is the new verse. Okay, addressed to the wives of Muhammad. He says, stop fighting. Okay, you are making life miserable for Muhammad. You better stop fighting and reconcile with him. If you don't, I will ask Muhammad to divorce every one of you. And I'll find him new wives. And among the new wives will be the widow and the virgin. The Quran does not say, reveal the identity of the widow and the virgin. That's where we talked about 23 years where Ali Dashti identifies the source, which reveals the identity of those two, the widow and the virgin. That was a 11th century tafsir written in Persian. It's a very authentic work in Islam. And it says, the widow is the long dead wife of Pharaoh. She must have been maybe 3,000 years old at the time. And then the virgin is the mother of Jesus, the Virgin Mary. She too must have been 700 plus years old when Muhammad arrived on the scene, but those two would become the wives of Prophet Muhammad in heaven. Now, when you look at all of these things, you can draw one of the three conclusions from the most improbable to the most probable. The most improbable story is that Mary remained a virgin all her life and she had only one child, Jesus. Absolutely wrong. Okay, we have seen the Christian sources themselves reveal that she had at least 7 children and she was not a virgin. And she was probably or almost certainly married twice, first to Joseph and then to Clopas. So she was twice married virgin. Then, if you look at if you look at the Jewish sources, Toledo Yeshu, it says on top of this, she also had an affair with a soldier by name Pantera, and the person to whom she was betrothed called off the engagement. Then you look at the Islamic sources, that's icing on the cake. Islam says that the Virgin Mary is now Mrs. Prophet Muhammad. That will make Jesus the son of Prophet Muhammad. That's all strange, but what else do you expect when you read something like the Bible or the Quran or the commentaries written on them? You find absolutely irrational superstitions, strangest claims. But when you look at all these things through the eyes, through the prism of reason, you get a very different understanding. With that, I'll pause and back to you, Shreya.
Thank you so much. A lot to basically digest here. And let me tell you one thing, viewers, Kalavai is not making up anything. He's basically analyzing 4 or 5 books. Most of us have stopped reading these days. Let's congratulate him for putting together this cogent argument and trying to present it as such. And I'm finding a lot of people essentially spewing bile on the channel. Look, for hundreds of years, Hindus just kept quiet. When you are criticizing our gods, our customs, our rituals, if somebody starts doing Purva Paksha on your religion, why are you getting your knickers in a twist?
There is a reason. There's a reason they are doing it.
Yeah,
there's a reason they are doing it because they cannot counter the facts I present.
Yes.
Okay, they are angry. Okay. And we should remember Christianity is a very dogmatic religion, right? So every fact I presented now is coming from the most authoritative researchers by the top-notch scholars. Okay. And then instead of getting angry and spewing hate on the YouTube channel, what Christians should do is to go back to their churches ask their priests, their pastors, their reverend fathers, and every other person, okay, just quote these things and say, did the Virgin Mary really have 7 children? Okay, go through that. And is this what Toledo Yeshu says? Is this what uh, the Muslim tradition says? If all of these are true, then which one do I believe? Okay, they should ask that question, because you can live under dogma, okay, live in total superstition and deny yourself the pleasures of truth and knowledge. Or you can jump in and you can get the taste of the nectar of knowledge and truth. That's the choice.
Thank you so much, sir. And this is just episode 1, and we are going to be examining many such things in that. It is a multi-part series. The next one will be next week. So do join us for that one. I'm not taking any questions because we are out of time. Thank you so much, Venkatji. And again, thanks for doing all the research and presenting it. Look, this is a very objective presentation. These are all authors who have done their work. They have done their tapasya and they have come out with these strange facts. It's up to you to figure out what is your true religion. We are just pointing, to some sources. That's it. Thank you so much, sir, again, and we'll see you again very soon. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Thank you.